the disarmament of Hamas, the release of all hostages, the Gaza Strip's demilitarization, Israeli security control over the Strip, and the establishment of an alternative civilian administration that is neither Hamas nor the Palestinian Authority. The Prime Minister's office also announced that the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, will prepare to take control of Gaza City while providing humanitarian assistance outside combat zones. The IDF said that it is fully mobilized and preparing for an expanded military operation in Gaza. This is yet another dangerous escalation of the conflict. For now, we have limited official details of Israel's military plans. However, according to Israeli media reports, the government foresees the displacement of all civilians from Gaza City by 7 October 2025, affecting some 800,000 people, many of them previously displaced. Reports indicate that the IDF would then surround the city for 3 months. This would then reportedly be followed by an additional 2 months to seize control of central Gaza's camps and clear the entire area of Palestinian armed groups. Mr. President, we are already witnessing a humanitarian catastrophe of unimaginable scale in Gaza. Director Ramesh Rajasingham from OCHA will shortly provide you with the latest updates in this regard. If these plans are implemented, they will likely trigger another calamity in Gaza, reverberating across the region and causing further forced displacements, killings and destruction, compounding the unbearable suffering of the population. Last night, thousands of protesters gathered in Tel Aviv and cities across Israel to call for a ceasefire and hostage release deal. The UN has been unequivocal. The only way to stop the immense human suffering in Gaza is through a full, immediate, and permanent ceasefire. All hostages must be released immediately and unconditionally. Israel must comply with its obligations under international humanitarian law, allowing rapid, safe, unimpeded, and large-scale delivery of humanitarian aid to the population. Civilians, including humanitarian workers and those seeking aid, must be protected. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security. Palestinians must be able to return to their homes. In its 19 July 2024 advisory opinion, the International Court of Justice stated that, and I quote, Israel, as the occupying power, has the obligation not to impede the Palestinian people from exercising its right to self-determination, including its right to an independent and sovereign state over the entirety of the occupied Palestinian territory. End of quote. Mr. President, as I emphasized to this Council a few days ago, there is no military solution to the armed conflict in Gaza or the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There will be no sustainable solution without an end to Israel's unlawful occupation and the achievement of a viable two-state solution. Gaza is and must remain an integral part of a Palestinian state. We must plan for Gaza's future as we address the urgency of developments on the ground today. We must establish political and security frameworks that can relieve the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, start early recovery and reconstruction, address the legitimate security concerns of Israelis and Palestinians, and forge a path for the realization of a viable two-state solution. In this regard, I urge the immediate implementation of the political, humanitarian and security steps outlined in the New York Declaration on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution of 29 July 2025. Critically, these frameworks must facilitate a legitimate Palestinian government that can reunify Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, politically, economically, and administratively. This government must represent Palestinians across the entirety of the occupied Palestinian territory. A united leadership is crucial to managing post-conflict Gaza and advancing Palestinian self-determination and sovereignty. I urge the Palestinian Authority to advance its stated goal of holding elections. Palestinians have the right to have their voices heard and to be meaningfully included in the process of shaping the future of the State of Palestine. Our ultimate goal remains unchanged: Israel and a fully independent, democratic, contiguous, viable and sovereign Palestinian state, of which Gaza is an integral part, living side by side in peace and security within secure and recognized borders on the basis of the pre-1967 lines, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states. I thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank Mr. Yencha for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham.
Thank you, Mr. President. The suffering endured in Gaza over the past 22 months has been nothing short of soul-searing. Our shared humanity demands that this unacceptable catastrophe is brought to an immediate end. Mr. President, I will address three matters today. First, I'm extremely concerned over the prolonged conflict, the reports of atrocities and further human toll that is likely to unfold following the government of Israel's decision to expand military operations in Gaza. This marks a grave escalation in the conflict that has already inflicted unimaginable suffering. Now, for over 670 days, Palestinians in Gaza have endured daily killings and injuries. More than 61,000 people have been killed, including at least 18,000 children, and 151,000 have been injured, according to Gaza's Ministry of Health. Meanwhile, 50 hostages are believed to remain in Gaza, with those still alive held in inhumane and appalling conditions. Thousands of Palestinians, including women and children, remain in Israeli detention, many held without charge or trial, all the required safeguards. A grim milestone has also been crossed in our sector, the humanitarian community. Over 500 humanitarian workers have been killed in Gaza since hostilities escalated, including at least 167 women. Smear campaigns against aid operations continue unabated. And as we approach World Humanitarian Day, we must insist on the protection of all aid workers. Mr. President, second, humanitarian conditions are beyond horrific. We have frankly run out of words to describe it. Whatever lifelines remain are collapsing under the weight of sustained hostilities, forced displacement, and insufficient levels of life-saving aid. Hunger-related deaths are rising, especially among children, with severe malnutrition. Since the escalation of hostilities in October 2023, the health authorities in Gaza have documented the deaths of 98 children from severe acute malnutrition, 37 alone since the 1st of July, just over a month ago. This is no longer a looming hunger crisis. This is starvation, pure and simple. Each day brings harrowing images of women, men, and children killed and injured while desperately seeking assistance. The situation is untenable, especially for older people, people with disabilities and children without parental care, and widowed women. Gaza lies in ruins. Almost everyone in Gaza has been forcibly displaced at some point over the past 2 years, and at least once. Palestinians in Gaza have been forced into an area that amounts to less than 14% of the territory, in areas that are not safe and are lacking basic services or shelter. Further, expansion of military operations will make these conditions even worse. Families in Gaza living in insecure and overcrowded conditions, many without shelter. 11% of some 6,500 households surveyed recently by humanitarian partners were reported to be living out in the open. No organization, UN or otherwise, has been able to bring shelter supplies into Gaza since the 2nd of March. The lack of adequate shelter is particularly worrisome, as we know that winter will soon be upon us. Given the scale of repeat displacement and current living conditions, preventing the entry of emergency shelter supplies defies the obligation to allow humanitarian relief for the population in need. The humanitarian system is effectively collapsed, hospitals are not protected, doctors have been killed or detained, and facilities are working without sufficient medical supplies. Water and sanitation infrastructure, already at a critical failing point before the crisis, are now almost completely failing, and social cohesion is unraveling. So how are the people in Gaza expected to survive in these conditions? Mr. President, my third point, the recent military tactical pauses have enabled some positive changes in humanitarian operations. Limited amounts of fuel have been allowed in, and on 5 August, Israeli authorities approved a mechanism for the gradual resumption of controlled commercial goods into Gaza. This has resulted in different types of food returning to markets and a slight decrease in some prices. Our teams on the ground caution us that despite these developments, meaningful change for the population remains elusive, as humanitarian conditions remain largely unchanged. Security conditions have remained volatile, fighting has continued, crossing arrangements have remained inadequate. Humanitarian missions, though less frequently denied outright, can still take over 18 hours, with teams stranded on dangerous roads. Extreme desperation is driving people to take the humanitarian aid in transit, but this need not be the case. We've seen that when assistance is rapidly and significantly scaled up, incidents of looting and insecurity decline, and trust begins to be rebuilt. The United Nations has the plan and the systems in place to respond. We've said this before, and we will say it again and again. Let us work. To assist all those in need at scale, we must have predictable access, and the movement of life-saving goods must be more effectively facilitated. It is equally critical that all humanitarian partners on the ground, including international humanitarian organizations, are allowed to deliver life-saving services. Registration processes for non-governmental organizations that the government of Israel introduced earlier this year are concerning and risk further undermining operational capacity and continuity. Mr. President, echoing the Secretary General, I've remained deeply concerned about the ripple effects of the expansion of Gaza military operations on the West Bank, where military operations, settler violence, and home demolitions persist at unprecedented and alarming rates. A year ago, the International Court of Justice determined that Israel must bring its unlawful presence, policies, and practices to an end as rapidly as possible. Developments in the West Bank worsen and an existing humanitarian situation that sadly remains less visible, but not because it is less severe, but because the global attention has been drawn elsewhere. Mr. President, Security Council members, and indeed the international community listening, states and all those with any influence must look within our bruised collective conscience and summon the courage to do so, to do what is necessary to end this inhumanity and pain. It is also what international law demands. Civilians must be protected, and their essential needs must be met, and hostages must be released unconditionally. Arbitrarily detained Palestinians must be freed. Israel must agree to and facilitate humanitarian relief operations, both into and within the Gaza Strip, to reach the population in need. The International Court of Justice's provisional measures in the case on the application of the Genocide Convention in Gaza remain in place, including the demand that Israel take immediate and effective measures to enable the provision of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance. Life and dignity should be respected for all. International humanitarian law serves as a compass for the conduct in war and is designed to ensure a minimum of humanity. The parties in all states must honor their commitment to this. The suffering must stop. Mr. President, thank you.
I thank Mr. Rajasingham for the information provided. I will now give the floor to the council members who would like to make statements. I give the floor to the delegation of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I thank ASG Yencha and Mr. Rajasingham for briefing us today. The United Kingdom requested this meeting alongside Denmark, France, Greece and Slovenia in response to the Government of Israel's decision to further escalate its military operations in Gaza. As my Prime Minister said, this decision is wrong, and we urge the Government of Israel to reconsider immediately. Expanding military operations will do nothing to bring an end to this conflict. It will not secure the release of the hostages. It will only deepen the suffering of Palestinian civilians in Gaza. This is not a path to resolution. It is a path to more bloodshed. President, just this week, the Security Council heard harrowing testimony from Eli David, the brother of Eviatar David, who's been cruelly taken by Hamas on 7 October. He's been held hostage in appalling and inhuman conditions for over 21 months. The Security Council has in its 4 resolutions since 7 October called for the unconditional and immediate release of the hostages. I repeat that call today. We are clear that Hamas must disarm and can play no future part in the governance of Gaza, where the Palestinian Authority must have a central role. But, as many family members of the hostages have warned, this decision by the Israeli government will do nothing to secure the return of the hostages. Instead, it risks further endangering their lives. This escalation will only exacerbate an already catastrophic humanitarian crisis, uprooting 1 million more people and forcing them into dangerously overcrowded, unsanitary and undersupplied areas. In Gaza, children and babies are suffering from starvation. Hundreds of civilians have been killed trying to access basic food supplies. This inhumanity cannot be justified. The partial aid access Israel granted in late July has proven woefully inadequate. We have a clear message for Israel. Urgently and permanently lift all restrictions on aid delivery. Yesterday, the UK announced a further $11.4 million for OCHA's Occupied Palestinian Territories Humanitarian Fund. It is vital that the UN and established humanitarian partners can operate safely and at scale, in line with the principles of humanity, impartiality, neutrality and independence. And Israel must not bar humanitarian NGOs from their essential work through unreasonable and arbitrary registration requirements. All land routes must be opened for essential supplies, including food, baby formula, medicine, shelter, fuel, and clean water. President, a diplomatic solution is possible, but both parties must step away from the path of destruction. We urge the parties to engage in good faith negotiations and to show political will to secure a ceasefire deal and commit to a path to peace. The recent conference on the two-state solution was a powerful demonstration of the international resolve to achieve a brighter future for the region. The UK will continue working with our partners on a long-term plan to secure peace in the region as part of a two-state solution. This is the only way to guarantee Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in peace, security and dignity. I thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación de...
I thank the delegation of the United Kingdom for their statement. I now give the floor to the delegation of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to thank ASG Genscher and Director Rajasingham for their briefings. Denmark joined France, Greece, Slovenia and the UK in calling for this urgent meeting. For months, the world has watched in despair as conditions in Gaza have grown more catastrophic by the day. Heartbreaking images and videos of suffering, destruction and death live-streamed on a daily basis. Instead of heeding our call to immediately end the war in Gaza, Israel has chosen to further escalate its offensive. We condemn the Israeli government's decision to expand the military operation in Gaza. We urge Israel to reverse its decision, which will not secure the release of the hostages nor help end the conflict. It will only cause further bloodshed and deepen the suffering of civilians. We categorically reject any forced displacement. The ICJ's advisory opinion on this matter must be fully respected. Any unilateral attempts to alter the demography or status of the Gaza Strip are unacceptable and constitute a clear violation of international law. Mr. President, civilians in Gaza are starving and face severe limitation in accessing humanitarian aid, aid which Israel is obligated to ensure the population receives. According to OCHA, 1 in 3 people in Gaza has not eaten for days, and over 1,300 of them have been killed while seeking food, most of them young men and boys desperately seeking to feed their families. Today, the entire Strip faces famine-like conditions. This is unconscionable. We deplore the killings of starving civilians trying to get food. The alarming frequency and scale of these incidents are simply unacceptable. We reiterate our call for transparent investigations into these incidents. As we have said many times before, Israel must immediately change course. All restrictions on the delivery of humanitarian aid must be lifted. Civilians, including humanitarian and UN personnel, as well as civilian infrastructure, must be protected in accordance with international law. We must return to the UN-led humanitarian aid system at once. Humanitarian aid must cease to be politicized and used as a political bargaining chip in Gaza. Denmark firmly condemns the heinous terrorist attacks on 7 October 2023 perpetrated by Hamas. There can be no justification for this attack, nor for the continued maltreatment of the remaining hostages. However, Israel's response must be exercised in compliance with international law and with full respect for international humanitarian law. The fight against terrorism cannot come at the expense of the rules that safeguard humanity. To conclude, Mr. President, the violence in Gaza must end. To the parties, we demand a return to a ceasefire, the delivery of humanitarian aid with no restrictions, and the immediate and unconditional release of all the remaining hostages. Denmark will never go back on those principles and will continue to reiterate these demands. We will not tire in our support to the two-state solution, and we will not tire in our commitment to peace in the Middle East. We urge the warring parties to stop burying peace in the rubble. Thank you.
I thank the delegation of Denmark for your statement. I now give the floor to the delegation of France.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, I would like to thank you for convening this emergency meeting, which we requested, together with our European partners on the Security Council. I also thank the Assistant Secretary General, Mr. Miroslav Jenča, and Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham from OCHA for their briefings today. Given the gravity of the most recent announcements by Israel, we needed to raise the alarm. As we said on the 8th of August, France condemns in the strongest possible terms the plan of the Israeli government to expand its military operations to take control of Gaza City with a view to establishing military control over the entirety of the Gaza Strip. France calls upon the Israeli government to reverse that decision. France recalls its firm opposition to any plan for the occupation, annexation and settlement of the Gaza Strip and the forced displacement of its population. Such actions would constitute further violations of international law of an extreme severity that are contrary to the fundamental principles upon which this organization is built and which contradict the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of the 19th of July 2024. They would also represent a threat to regional security and would lead to an absolute impasse. The extension and intensification of Israeli military operations in the most densely populated areas of Gaza would have dramatic humanitarian consequences in Gaza City, but also in the rest of Gaza. Civilians are already living in horrifying conditions. The images of children dying of hunger or civilians being targeted as they try to find food are unbearable. It is essential that Israel comply with its obligations under international humanitarian law. Announcements and half measures are not good enough. The civilian population and infrastructure must be protected. Israel must urgently open up all crossing points to allow for the immediate, massive, safe, and unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance across the territory. Israel must allow the United Nations and all humanitarian actors, including international non-governmental organizations, to operate freely and in full security. The implementation of the decision of the Israeli government will in no way contribute to the security of Israel and its nationals, in particular that of the hostages that are still held by Hamas in Gaza. France once again robustly calls upon Hamas to ensure their immediate unconditional release and to seize upon the ceasefire proposals rather than to, through its obstructionist attitude, to continue the plight of the population of Gaza. France calls for the disarmament of Hamas and for its surrender. Mr. President, the future of the Gaza Strip must be in the context of a future Palestinian state run by the Palestinian Authority. France will continue to mobilize for the implementation of the two-state solution, which is the only solution that can guarantee lasting peace and security for Israelis and Palestinians. And we did this at the New York conference that we co-chaired with Saudi Arabia. We call upon all states to join this collective momentum by endorsing the New York Declaration, which proposes concrete measures to preserve the two-state solution and to work towards the stabilization of the Gaza Strip. It also proposes the deployment of a temporary international stabilization mission to ensure the security of Israelis and Palestinians. Mr. President, after 22 months of suffering, the immense pain endured by the population of Gaza and the hostages must end immediately. For that reason, we call upon the government of Israel to reverse its decision to take military control of the Gaza Strip. France reiterates its call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire, for the release of the hostages, and for the massive, unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance. Thank you.
I thank the delegation of France for their statement. I now give the floor to the delegation of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for convening this urgent meeting upon the request of the European members of this Council. I also wish to thank Assistant Secretary General Mr. Miroslav Jenca and OCHA Director Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham for their briefings. Only days ago, the international community gathered in New York with a clear yet urgent message. The war in Gaza must end, the two-state solution must be realized, Palestinians, Israelis, and all peoples of the region deserve a fair chance at peace. Yet, recent developments seem to have pushed this proposal further out of reach. We condemn Israel's decision to further expand its military operations in Gaza, and we urge Israel to reconsider it. Such actions would endanger the lives of all civilians in Gaza, deepen the humanitarian suffering, and exacerbate the anguish over the fate of the remaining hostages. They would also worsen the already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza and risk further loss of life and large-scale displacement of Palestinians. We strongly oppose any attempts to forcibly displace the Palestinian population and reiterate that any potential annexation of Gaza or any other part of the occupied Palestinian territories would contravene international law and numerous Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 2334, would jeopardize regional stability and security and would undermine the prospect of a two-state solution. Mr. President, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is severe and worsening. Hospitals are overstretched, starvation and malnutrition, especially among children, are worsening, access to clean water remains limited, and civilians risk their lives daily in search of food. We cannot turn a blind eye to this tragedy, nor remain silent while hostages continue to suffer at the hands of Hamas. We call once again for the immediate, unimpeded, and large-scale delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza. The blockade must be lifted, civilians and humanitarian workers must be protected in accordance with international humanitarian law, and the work of the aid agencies should be facilitated. Greece has taken concrete steps to alleviate suffering in Gaza. Just yesterday, in close cooperation with the European Union and other partners of the region, we conducted an airdrop of food supplies over Gaza. We also stressed the need to fully implement the humanitarian steps agreed upon between Israel and the European Union to improve the situation in Gaza. The expertise of the United Nations systems, particularly UNRWA, is pivotal. In addition, OCHA, as we have just heard again today, has repeatedly expressed its readiness to initiate a UN-coordinated humanitarian plan in the event of a ceasefire or pause in hostilities. We reaffirm our unwavering support for the agency in this regard. Mr. President, Greece's position remains principled and consistent. We have repeatedly condemned the atrocities of October 7. Hamas rule in Gaza must end. All hostages must be released immediately and unconditionally. At the same time, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza must be addressed without delay, and we remain steadfast in our support for the international call to implement the two-state solution. Mr. President, violence in all its forms is never the answer. Dialogue and diplomacy are the only viable path to lasting peace. We therefore call on both parties to agree to an immediate and permanent ceasefire to secure the release of all hostages and to advance efforts towards a two-state solution in line with relevant Security Council resolutions while guaranteeing Israel's right to exist in peace and security. I thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the delegation of Greece for your statement. I now give the floor to the delegation of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for convening the urgent meeting at the request of the members of the Council, including my own country, Slovenia. We thank Assistant Secretary General Jenča, as well as Director Rajasingham, for their briefings. Mr. President, each time we come to this chamber to discuss the situation in Gaza, we come thinking that we cannot possibly reach new depth. And yet, we convene again today, following the reprehensible announcement by the Israel cabinet that it intends to expand its military campaign and take control of the Strip. A plan of horror and destruction. A new law which Slovenia utterly rejects. A new law which will end in mass civilian casualties and suffering. A new law which will make Israelis less safe in the short and long term. A new law, in spite of continuous appeals from the international community and from the numerous voices from Israel to end the war. Colleagues, Israel's decision directly contradicts the July 2024 advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, which declared that Israel must end its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory. It shows contempt towards the two-state solution, which was resoundingly reinforced by almost the entire international community at the conference held just 2 weeks ago, and which remains the official position of this Council, codified through its resolutions. Slovenia expresses its firm condemnation of this plan, and we call for its immediate reversal. Mr. President, Gaza's death toll is simply staggering. Israel has pursued a deliberate policy of starvation, of manufacturing a famine to pursue political and military gains, in a clear and blatant violation of international humanitarian law. The aerial photos which have emerged of Gaza in recent days show nothing but total destruction, a piece of land reduced to dust. And now we are faced with the prospect of further military escalation, of more violence, of an operation which will undoubtedly wreak havoc on civilians in Gaza and the hostages alike. Obvious questions arise. What will happen to those surviving Palestinians once Israel launches its takeover, particularly the 1 million people living in Gaza City, whose lives already hang in the balance, exhausted by attacks and denied aid? We will not be able to claim that we didn't know. We know that civilians are destined to suffer further mass casualties. We know that they will be displaced once more, chased from corner to tiny camps or even beyond. What will become of the hostages? Just 4 days ago, we heard the heartbreaking testimony of Eli David, brother of Eviatar David, who is still held hostage by Hamas in Gaza. He told us in clear terms that we cannot wait any longer. Who, if not this Council, can stop the killing? Every minute counts for Eviatar. Every minute counts for countless civilians caught in the fire in Gaza. We cannot simply accept a forever war and the continued destruction and traumatization of generations of Palestinians and Israelis. Ambassador Mansour on Tuesday used the words, "We chose peace." The Palestinian Authority has made commitments to comprehensive reforms necessary to govern Gaza and the West Bank. Does the Israeli leadership have the moral clarity to abandon military adventurism and choose peace? Does Hamas have the courage to choose peace, disarm, and to release the hostages immediately and without condition in full dignity? Colleagues, all civilians in Gaza, Israelis and Palestinians, are hostages. Our responsibility to move to protect them against upcoming military onslaught weighs heavy on our shoulders, including as an elected member of this Council. The impunity felt by the occupying power needs to be stopped. We listen and we hear a global cry for the war to stop, for hostages to be freed, for aid to flow in. We need to take action. That's why this Council was created, and that's why the Charter provided the Council with many tools to maintain peace and security. We stand ready to do whatever it takes to stop the killing and suffering. Thank you.
I thank the delegation of Slovenia for their statement. I now give the floor to the delegation of Algeria.
Mr. President, at the outset, I thank you for the prompt scheduling of this meeting, a meeting requested by almost all members of this Council, a meeting born of urgency. We extend our appreciation to ASG Yanka and to Mr. Rajasingham for their sobering briefings on the catastrophic reality in Gaza. Yes, Gaza is facing hell. It is in the hands of an occupying power that threatens the international peace and security. Algeria condemns in the strongest terms the decision of the Israeli cabinet to displace the entire population of Gaza City and northern Gaza, and to impose full military control of the Gaza Strip, as if Gaza was not already under occupation, as if Gaza was not already under inhuman siege. These are war crimes, and those who draw their maps in blood must not walk in the shadow of impunity. Justice must call them by name. There must be accountability. Mr. President, after 22 months of forced displacement, 22 months of starvation, 22 months of ethnic cleansing, such an operation would not merely ruin Gaza. It will just annihilate what remains of it. As if killing more than 62,000 people were not enough. As if killing more than 18,000 children for God's sake, were not enough. As if killing more than 12,000 women were not enough. As if starving to death more than 200 human beings were not enough. the list is too long, too heavy, too dark for this page to hold. And yet, persisting in their genocidal tactics, the Israeli occupying power plan more. Can you imagine what will be left if they execute their plan? Their objective is clear, crystal clear, to push an entire people outside their homeland. Palestinians shall have no state, no flag, no future in their land. No Palestinian shall stay from the river to the sea. Yet, they forget. They forget that the land remembers its sons. They forget that olive trees do not surrender to the axe. They grow back from the root. Despite the brutality of the oppression, Palestinians will not abandon their homeland. Palestinians will not let go their rights. We believe in their resilience, as we believe that Gaza, although wounded and bleeding, will one day rise again. Mr. President, let us be clear. The Israeli authorities care nothing for international law. They care nothing for this council. They care nothing for humanity itself. They act with brutality, cruelty, and barbarity, stripping Palestinians of their very essence as human beings, reducing them to something less in their eyes, to human animals. Yes, for them, Palestinians are just human animals. And so, they orchestrate the killing of Palestinians by every instrument. Starvation, thirst, weapons, and humiliation. Humiliation. Mr. President, faced with this genocide, every voice has risen. The International Court of Justice investigates the plausible crime of genocide by the Israeli occupying power. The International Criminal Court pursues those who sign their names in the records of war crimes. The General Assembly condemns repeatedly the occupation and demands its end. The United Nations Human Rights Council counts the wounds and denounces its violation. And yet, in this chamber, the one entrusted with peace and security by the United Nations Charter, sits. The Council sits silent. The Council says nothing. And silence is not neutral. Silence kills. Mr. President, the Security Council must rise to defend the child clutching the last crumb of bread. Rise to shield the mother searching for her sons under rubble. Rise to help the father wounded while seeking help to feed his kids. Rise to break the silence, to break the cycle of impunity. This Council must act decisively, resolutely, by resorting to its utmost tools to act under Chapter 7 of the Charter. The hour has come to impose sanctions on the hand that steals the land, on the flag that flaps over ruin. The hour has come to impose sanctions on the enemy of humanity. I thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the delegation of Algeria for their statement. I give the floor to the delegation of Somalia.
Mr. President, I thank you for the swift convening of this emergency meeting today. I also express gratitude to Assistant Secretary General Yanka and Mr. Ramesh, Head and Representative of OCHA in Geneva, for their sobering briefing and tireless commitment. In the last 48 hours, Israel's announcement of its intention to impose military control over the entire Gaza Strip is not an abstraction. It's a chilling blueprint for the next chapter of its devastation to come. For the 2 million people still trapped in Gaza, this means the escalation of what has already become hell on earth, literally and figuratively, leading to the world's worst man-made famine. It's a death sentence for civilians where over 60,000 Palestinians have been killed since the escalation began, the majority of them women and children. More than 150,000 have been injured, and 90% of Gaza's population are now internally displaced, many living in makeshift shelters without clean water or food. The expanded military assault will make survival impossible for the civilian population. The International Court of Justice, in its recent advisory opinion, reaffirmed the legal obligation of Israel regarding the occupied Palestinian territory. The court was unequivocal. The occupation, the blockade, the denial of humanitarian access, and actions resulting in collective punishment violate international law. The continued targeting of essential services and the forcible displacement of the Palestinian people from their land in Gaza or the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, directly contradicts the principles this Council exists to uphold. We also stress the necessity of preserving the legal and historical status quo at the Islamic and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem, recognizing the essential role of the Hashemite custodianship in this regard. We are gravely concerned about the recent incidents at Al-Aqsa Mosque and reiterate that any provocation or violation undermines peace and stability and must be unequivocally condemned. Mr. President, we have heard enough talk of security as a pretext for collective punishment. True security cannot be built upon the ruins of justice. There can be no peace while occupation persists, and no real security unless the rights of Palestinians, including the right to self-determination, are recognized and protected. What is needed now is not another brief pause, but an immediate and a permanent ceasefire. Not another limited corridor, but full and unfettered humanitarian access so that food, water, medicine provided by agencies like UNRWA and OCHA can flow freely, not as a charity, but as a matter of right. Not another partial exchange, but the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages and detainees so that no one endures inhumane conditions under illegal captivity away from their families and loved ones. Not more negotiations to nowhere, but a genuine commitment to end the occupation and realize the two-state solution this Council and the world have long endorsed. We must not allow the language of military necessity to drown out the cries of the hungry and the displaced. The forced starvation of a population is not an accident of war. It's a crime under international law. The bombardment of neighborhoods and the expulsion of families are not regrettable side effects. They are violations that demand accountability. Mr. President, to conclude, this is not just a test for Israel and Palestine. It's a test for all humanity. Will we stand by, citing complexity and precedent? Or will we act with the urgency and moral clarity that this moment demands? In these darkest moments, it's worth remembering what brought the United Nations into existence in the first place. Our charter opens with a solemn pledge, and I quote, "to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war," end of quote. A promise born from the ashes of World War II, when the world vowed never again. Yet, 8 decades later, we are confronted once more with the images and the realities of children buried beneath rubble, starvation used as a weapon, families uprooted, and entire communities erased. If we cannot act now to uphold this promise in Gaza, we must ask ourselves, what then is the purpose of this Council? What, in truth, remains of our solemn oath to future generations? Let the response not be graveyard silence. And silence in moments like these is not neutrality. For all the victims, it is a verdict. I thank you, Mr. President.
Agradezco.
I thank the delegation of Somalia for their statement. I give the floor to the delegation of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President, for convening this meeting in a timely manner. I would also like to thank ASG Incha and Mr. Rajasingham for their concise and powerful briefings. The Republic of Korea is gravely concerned by the Israeli Security Cabinet's recent approval to expand the war in Gaza and occupy Gaza City, as this plan entails significant and multifaceted risks. We urge Israel to retract this plan. In this context, I would like to address each risk in turn. First, the plan, if implemented, will devastate an already catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Daily images of starving Palestinian children and aerial scenes of Gaza's near total destruction demands our attention to focus on alleviating the dire humanitarian needs. However, the proposed military escalation will only deepen the extended suffering of an exhausted, sick, and hungry population. Not deliver the humanitarian relief they so clearly need, and that the international community is urgently calling for. The proposed plan's primary target, Gaza City, is one of the few remaining areas where a large civilian population has sought tenuous refuge. And a renewed full-scale operation against it will inevitably cause another round of forced displacement and killings. With much of Gaza already declared a buffer zone or under evacuation orders, and its borders largely sealed, displaced civilians lack shelter or safe zones, raising fears of mass expulsion or so-called voluntary migration, which is not in itself voluntary. Second, this plan entails a grave risk to the lives of the hostages. This Council, including my country, has spoken with one voice in calling for their immediate and unconditional release. Yet, the announced plan, if implemented, will expose them to intensified hostilities and undermine diplomatic efforts toward their freedom. While Israel claims that it will push for the release of the hostages through decisive military victory, such an outcome could make it more difficult to bring the hostages home, a concern voiced by their families. Hamas' explicit warning that any further military expansion could risk the hostage, which the Republic of Korea resolutely condemns, adds further weight to this concern. Meanwhile, we remind Hamas that the release of all hostages is imperative to prevent any further deterioration to the situation. Hamas' continued holding of hostages, despite the ongoing despair of innocent civilians in Gaza, is unjustifiable. Under any excuse, nothing but a contemptible act. Third, Israel should not undermine the prospect of a two-state solution and regional stability. The Republic of Korea has continuously reiterated our full support for the two-state solution, along with the vast majority of the international community, in line with relevant UNSC resolution, including Resolution 2334, as the only viable path forward to bring peace, security, prosperity, and dignity to all people in the region. Yet Israel's plan encompasses so many elements incoherent to the resolution, which can result in seizing full control of Gaza while rejecting the Palestinian Authority. These actions are exactly the opposite of what the resolution aimed for: peaceful and sustainable coexistence of Israel and Palestinians. Israel must therefore not only retract the plan, but also cease any annexation efforts, including its West Bank settlement activities, which are clearly illegal under international law. In closing, Mr. President, let me make a final remark. As a representative from a long divided, once war-torn nation, the Republic of Korea understands, perhaps more than most, the tragic consequences of protracted conflict, as well as the urgency of multilateral assistance and humanitarian aid. Our history powerfully teaches us that military force alone cannot guarantee permanent peace and security. It can only defer the recurrence of conflict. This is why, despite the persistence of challenging circumstances, we remain committed to resolving differences through dialogue and cooperation rather than through force. We therefore call once again on all relevant parties to sincerely engage with ongoing mediation efforts of the international community aimed at securing ceasefire, releasing the hostages, and mobilizing and ensuring unhindered and dignified aid to Gaza at scale. Only through a genuine dialogue, sustained commitment, and mutual compromise can we hope to construct the robust foundation for a just and durable peace for all. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Republic of Korea for their statement. I give the floor to Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for convening this emergency meeting at the request and with support of almost all of the members of the Security Council. I also thank Assistant Secretary General Yencha and Mr. Rajasinghan for their valuable briefings. Sierra Leone expresses its full solidarity with the leadership and personnel of the United Nations and all humanitarian partners who, despite immense challenges, continue to serve humanity with courage and dedication. Mr. President, colleagues, the decision by the Israeli Security Cabinet to take control of Gaza City through an expanded military operation has shocked and alarmed the international community and capitals across the world. As underscored in the Secretary General's statement on the issue, this represents an extremely dangerous escalation that will deepen the already catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Gaza, cause further mass displacement, and increase civilian casualties in a territory already devastated by months of bombardment. If implemented, such reoccupation or annexation would constitute a grave breach of international law, including international humanitarian law. It reflects collective punishment of the Palestinian population through indiscriminate and systemic attacks on civilians and obstruction of urgently needed humanitarian assistance both prohibited under the Geneva Conventions. This course of action is in direct contravention of the International Court of Justice's 2024 advisory opinion on the legal consequences of Israel's policies and practices in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and is contrary to binding Security Council resolutions, including 242 of 1967 and 2334 of 2016. These instruments reaffirm the inadmissibility of acquiring territory by force, the illegality of settlement activity, and the imperative of ending the occupation that began in 1967. As the Secretary General has further warned, there will be no sustainable solution to this situation, to this conflict, without an end to this unlawful occupation and achievement of a viable two-state solution. Gaza is and must remain an integral part of a Palestinian state. End of quote. The scale of the humanitarian crisis is unprecedented. Over 61,000 civilians killed, 152,000 wounded, and the entire population on the brink of famine, according to the latest IPC alert. Humanitarian workers themselves are going without daily meals as access is blocked. Inaction by this Council and member states with influence will only lead to further destruction, loss of life, and the erosion of human dignity. Mr. President, the plight of the remaining hostages is a matter of serious concern, and Sierra Leone reiterates its call for their immediate and unconditional release. However, the situation cannot be used to justify violations of international law. Measures of collective punishment or the unlawful annexation of territory. International law requires that civilians be protected at all times, without exception. Reoccupation and annexation will not address Israel's legitimate security concerns. On the contrary, such measures are likely to deepen hostility, entrench instability, and delay the normalization of relations with its neighbors. Genuine normalization endorsed by the Arab Peace Initiative and consistent with the two-state solution offers Israel the prospect of lasting peace, security, and regional acceptance, but only if it is accompanied by an end to occupation and the realization of Palestinian statehood. This conflict demands both urgent action to halt the violence and a long-term commitment to a political horizon grounded in a two-state solution. Any action that ignores these objectives risks perpetuating instability in occupied Palestinian territory and the wider region. Accordingly, Sierra Leone reiterates the following. First, the Council must remain united in demanding an immediate and lasting ceasefire and in using all diplomatic and political tools to ensure compliance with international law and the relevant UN resolutions. We also reiterate the need and legal obligation for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages held by Hamas and other armed groups since 7 October 2023, all Palestinians as well as all Palestinians detainees. We urge Hamas and the other armed groups to allow access to the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, to the hostages to assess and support their well-being. Second, in line with the ICJ's provisional measures of 24 May 2024, Israel must, in full cooperation with the United Nations, ensure the unhindered provision at scale of basic services and humanitarian aid throughout Gaza, in full respect of international humanitarian law. Third, recalling the ICJ's advisory opinion of 19 July 2024, Israel's continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territory is unlawful and must end as rapidly as possible. All policies and actions that harm the civilian population or undermine the viability of the two-state solution must cease immediately. Fourth, accountability is essential. The Council must act to end the cycle of impunity that has allowed violations to persist for decades. All grave breaches of international law, including annexation, must be met with consequences. Mr. President, For decades, the United Nations has provided a clear framework for peace. Two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security within internationally recognized borders, with Jerusalem as their shared capital. These are not aspirational ideals. They are obligations arising from the resolutions of this Council and the principles of the UN Charter. The decision to reoccupy Gaza moves in the opposite direction, from law towards chaos, from diplomacy towards escalation. It risks destroying what remains of the credibility of the political process and further diminishing prospects of a negotiated settlement. The Council must reject any action that seeks to alter the status of Gaza by force and must reaffirm unequivocally that Gaza is an inseparable part of the Palestinian state. We must work collectively to uphold international law, to end the occupation, and to realize the vision of two states living in peace, security, and mutual recognition. The time for principled and decisive action is now. I thank you.
I thank the delegation of Sierra Leone for their statement. I give the floor to the delegation of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Assistant Secretary General Yensha and Director Rajasingham, for your briefings. Mr. President, the United States government believes that today's meeting is emblematic of the counterproductive role that far too many governments on this Council and throughout the UN system have played on this issue. Meanwhile, the United States has been working tirelessly to free the hostages, end this war, and give civilians in Gaza a future free of Hamas. To do so, we need to place responsibility where it lies, with Hamas, and hold it and other Gaza terrorist organizations fully accountable. Today's meeting, like so many other recent actions, undermines those efforts. Israel has accepted 3 ceasefire proposals. Hamas consistently rejected them. It is not negotiating in good faith. We know this because we are in the room. The simple truth is that this war could end today if Hamas let the hostages and all of Gaza go free. Remarkably, instead of pressuring Hamas, members of this body have encouraged and rewarded its intransigence, actively prolonging the war by spreading lies about Israel, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and the United States, and by handing propaganda victories to terrorists. Mr. President, the most recent round of negotiations collapsed because Hamas drew encouragement from efforts to target Israel with libels and lies, the ill-conceived and performative two-state solution conference, and unilateral announcements regarding recognition of a Palestinian state. Just days ago, a Hamas official touted the wave of recognition announcements as a result of the atrocities of October 7th. This is a disgrace. The government of Israel did not make its decision to advance its military campaign in a vacuum, but after months of Hamas's intransigence. Hamas refuses to accept a ceasefire and continues to torture the hostages. The United States supports Israel's right to defend itself against Hamas's terrorism. And ultimately, Israel has a right to decide what is necessary for its security and what measures are appropriate to end the threat posed by Hamas and other similar groups. It is unfortunate that members have again taken advantage of today's meeting to accuse Israel of genocide. These accusations are politically motivated and categorically false. They are part of a deliberate, cynical propaganda campaign as Hamas attempts to win symbolic victories to compensate for total defeat in war. The United States refutes these allegations entirely. Israel has taken numerous measures to limit harm to civilians and to address humanitarian needs. The loss of civilian life in Gaza is tragic, but the responsibility for this rests with Hamas. Mr. President, the United States remains committed to 1. Addressing humanitarian needs, 2. Freeing the hostages, and 3. Achieving peace. Too often, members of this Council spotlight only the first without acknowledging that the three issues are interrelated. No one wants to see innocent Gazans go hungry or thirsty. President Trump has addressed this, and he has said that the United States is going to be even more involved in these efforts. The United States has stepped up support for the secure delivery of humanitarian aid because the international community has failed to prevent Hamas from diverting it and using it to support terrorism and oppression. The United States continues to work tirelessly to feed hungry civilians in a way that denies Hamas the opportunity to benefit. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is critical to that effort as it continues to supply food directly into the hands of civilians. The GHF has distributed over 110 million meals, all while preventing Hamas looting. We call upon the UN to take advantage of the steps Israel has taken, including humanitarian pauses and designated corridors, as well as to work with the GHF, which has demonstrated it can securely deliver aid to civilians in Gaza. As Ambassador Huckabee has said, we support the GHF scaling up to 16 distribution sites to address critical needs. Mr. President, just last week, this Council heard evidence that Hamas continues to starve innocent people held hostage underground and on the verge of death. We cannot allow this to happen. We must hold Hamas accountable. The United States has made clear on multiple occasions that Hamas must be removed from power. As long as it remains, there will not be peace, not for Israel and not for the Gazans who deserve to begin a new chapter free of Hamas. The United States calls upon members of the Security Council and all countries to demand that Hamas immediately release all hostages, living and dead, and lay down its weapons and end this terrible conflict. I thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the delegation of the United States for their statement. I give the floor to the delegation of Guyana.
Mr. President, thank you for convening this meeting with the urgency that the situation demands. I also thank Assistant Secretary General Yencha and Mr. Rajasingham of OCHA for the information provided. Mr. President, after months of public expressions from various Israeli officials, we are confronted with the decision of the Israeli Security Cabinet to occupy Gaza City by 7th October 2025. The implementation of this decision will engender the forcible displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and would further undermine the two-state solution. We call on Israel to reverse this reprehensible decision. In both Gaza and the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, we are witnessing in real time and on a daily basis decisions and actions that violate international law and threaten regional and international peace and security. It is striking, Mr. President, that Israel continues to announce to the world beforehand, including in this Council, decisions that would violate international law if implemented. We have witnessed this with UNRWA and more recently with OCHA. This decision to take full control of Gaza is the latest installment in Israel's contemptible actions against the Palestinian people. It comes on top of numerous infractions committed over the decades since the decision was made for the Israeli state to be established in the land of Palestine in 1947. Indeed, Palestinians have lived through the Nakba and the ensuing years characterized by constant violence and dispossession owing to the Israeli occupation. Guyana reiterates its condemnation of the attacks on Israel on 7th October, perpetrated by Hamas and other armed groups. Yet, Mr. President, nothing, absolutely nothing, justifies the collective punishment that Israel has perpetuated against the people of Gaza over the past 2 years. Mr. President, dear colleagues, there are 3 questions which each member state of the United Nations must ask itself. First, why does the occupying power act in such defiance of the international community, even though it is in contravention of international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law? Second, why are the actions of the occupying power not met with strong, unified, and collective positions by this Council? And third, would any member state of this Council allow its citizens to be subject to this type of inhumane treatment by any actor, including a fellow member state of the United Nations? The honest answers to these questions should inspire a sense of urgency in all of us to act now to end Israel's war against Palestinians on every front that this war is being fought. In the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, where Israel continues operations that result in displacement of Palestinians, in injuries and in fatalities, where settler violence has become normalized under the might of the Israeli security forces, where Palestinians continue to lose their property and livelihoods under vexing circumstances, where Israeli officials carry out provocative visits to holy sites, adding another layer to existing tensions, and in Gaza, which is bearing the weight of a humanitarian catastrophe characterized by famine, disease, death, displacement, denial, and yes, impunity. We, the Security Council, must respond to the fact that over 61,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since October 7, and this number increases every single day. In an unfortunate move, Israel has now announced its intention to intensify its military operations in Gaza. With the scale of destruction that has taken place already in Gaza, there are hardly any buildings left to target. Therefore, let us be clear about the objective of intensifying military operations in the Strip and what it would mean for Palestinians who have, to this point, managed to defy the odds and remain alive, humiliated and persecuted as they are. We must also consider what intensified military operations would mean for United Nations personnel and humanitarians who continue to operate in Gaza. Their operations would be further curtailed, since the already precarious security situation would be exacerbated, and the risks to their personal safety and security would also increase. Let us also consider what intensified military operations could mean for the hostages still being held by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups. Just this week, we discussed the atrocious situation to which these individuals have been subjected, and we all demanded their immediate and unconditional release. In that context, my delegation had stressed that the persons being held hostage should not be used as bargaining chips to extract concessions. Their continued captivity is a grave violation of international law, which must not continue to be prolonged. We therefore reiterate our call for the release of all individuals held captive by Hamas and other armed groups in Gaza. Mr. President, the Council must act in the face of all that is taking place in Gaza, and now in response to Israel's annexation plans. The International Court of Justice was clear in its pronouncements regarding the illegality of any annexation of Palestinian territory by Israel. We must intensify our efforts to ensure Israel completely evacuates the Palestinian territory and withdraws to the pre-1967 lines in accordance with the relevant UN resolutions and the advisory opinion of the ICJ. Guyana also urges that this Council act collectively to achieve an immediate, unconditional and permanent ceasefire in Gaza and to end the violence against the civilians in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. We must also take action to enable conditions for a drastic improvement in the humanitarian situation in Gaza. We have taken note that Israel's military plans involve providing humanitarian aid to civilians outside combat zones. Unfortunately, the operations of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation have already provided us with enough information on what the provision of aid by the GHF looks like: inadequate, dangerous, and limited in reach. The Council must demand facility for the United Nations and its humanitarian partners to have full humanitarian access to all civilians in need in Gaza, so that there can be a flood of assistance into the area in a rapid, safe, and unhindered manner. Actions by other UN member states must also complement Security Council action. In this regard, Guyana is encouraged by the decisions announced by some member states in response to the decision of the Israeli Security Cabinet. Every member state has a responsibility to ensure that it is not contributing in any way to the perpetuation of the war in Gaza, and therefore to the attempts to annihilate the Palestinian people. Mr. President, when appeals to morality, to humanity, and even to legality fail to produce the required action, the Council must delve into its toolbox to save lives. We have long reached this point, and Guyana is prepared to act with fellow Council members to take the relevant decisions. I thank you.
I thank the delegation of Guyana for their statement. I give the floor to the delegation of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Once again, we meet here in this Council as Gaza bleeds under systematic, premeditated, and deliberate violations of international law, including international humanitarian law, this Council's own resolutions, and binding orders of the ICJ. And all of this committed with impunity by Israel, the occupying power. President, I would like to thank Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Zhencha and Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham of OCHA for their sobering briefings. The complementary information shared by the two briefers presents a picture that is beyond belief. A tragedy unfolding before our eyes, in our clear sight, and unfortunately, in this time and age. And while not enough has been done to stop it, to stop Israel, the occupying power, ASG Zhencha has described the Israeli decision to expand military operations in Gaza as a dangerous escalation, and which, if implemented, will displace all civilians from Gaza City. Mr. Zhencha referred to, and I quote, another horrific chapter, and Mr. Rajasingham described it beyond horrific, impossible to describe in words, untenable, and rightly so. And his call to respond to our collective conscience, to uphold international law, are most pertinent. Mr. President, the Prime Minister of Pakistan has strongly condemned the Israeli cabinet's decision to take control of Gaza City, calling it a dangerous escalation in an already catastrophic war against the people of Palestine. And in a joint statement yesterday, the Ministerial Committee, mandated by the Joint Extraordinary Arab-Islamic Summit, along with other countries, including Pakistan, has expressed strong condemnation and categorical rejection of this announcement, denouncing it as an unacceptable escalation, a blatant violation of international law, and a brazen attempt to entrench illegal occupation by force. Mr. President, this latest Israeli move aims to erase Palestinian presence. And contrary to what some claim and expect, this action will extinguish prospects for peace and undermine all regional and international efforts to peacefully resolve this conflict. So let us be clear. It is the culmination of a campaign of ethnic cleansing. First, it violates international law and Security Council resolutions, including 242 and 338, as well as Council's Resolution 2735. Secondly, it threatens mass displacement of over 1 million Palestinians, a grave breach of the Fourth Geneva Convention. And thirdly, it actually follows a clear pattern that we have seen: sustained bombardment, killing and maiming of thousands, destruction of an entire infrastructure, dismantling of humanitarian systems, forced starvation and displacement, all culminating in occupation under the pretext of security. Those shielding Israel from accountability through political cover, military support, or diplomatic protection are complicit and must share responsibility. They must reconsider their policies, for history will judge them harshly. Mr. President, Gaza is enduring a full-scale humanitarian catastrophe. For nearly 2 years, it has suffered indiscriminate bombardment, total blockade, and deliberate deprivation and starvation, while violence and dispossession escalate in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The so-called humanitarian system is a cruel illusion. Famine is rampant. Civilians are being shot trying to collect food. And as the distinguished representative of Slovenia rightly questioned, can there be a new law? Other colleagues have rightly expressed concern about the long term. But what will be there to salvage in the long term? Pakistan believes the action is needed now. Under the circumstances, this Council must urgently demand Israel, under Chapter 7 of the Charter, to refrain from its stated plan of occupying Gaza City. The Council should also call for an immediate, unconditional and permanent ceasefire, release of hostages, and exchange of Palestinian prisoners, a complete halt to displacement and aggression, unhindered large-scale humanitarian access, and protection of the legal and historical status quo at Jerusalem's holy sites. Mr. President, the Security Council must be ready to impose a cost on Israel if it defies the demand of the Council and indeed the will of the international community. The Council must enact enforcement measures including the deployment of an international protection force to save the besieged population. As our Prime Minister has affirmed, the root cause of this ongoing tragedy is Israel's prolonged, illegal occupation of Palestinian territory. As long as this occupation endures, peace will remain elusive. Mr. President, any attempt to sever Gaza from the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory is a direct attack on the very foundation of the two-state vision. Gaza is and will remain an inseparable part of the state of Palestine, and we are convinced that justice is unstoppable, that the resilience of the Palestinian people and the universal call for their rights will ultimately overcome oppression. And let me also categorically state that decisions for governance and their future are for the Palestinians and Palestinians alone to make. No one else can decide for them. Pakistan reaffirms full support for the Palestinian people's legitimate rights, including right to self-determination and the establishment of an independent, viable and contiguous state of Palestine based on pre-1967 borders with Al-Quds Al-Sharif as its capital. The recent high-level conference on Palestine was timely. It must now be followed by coordinated international action to realize long overdue peace and justice in the region. Mr. President, this Council must go beyond statements. It must act to end aggression, to protect civilians, restore justice, and ensure accountability. The credibility of this body and the prospects of peace in the Middle East are at stake. I thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the delegation of Pakistan for their statement. I give the floor to the delegation of China.
Thank you, President. President, China supports the initiative of the United Kingdom, Denmark, France, Greece and Slovenia to convene this meeting. We also thank ASG Yancha and Mr. Raja Singham for their briefings. The Gaza conflict has persisted for 22 months, leading to over 61,000 civilian deaths and resulting in an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. Despite repeated calls from the international community for a ceasefire and cessation of fighting, the situation worryingly continues to evolve in an even more dangerous direction. Given the urgency at hand, the international community, including the Security Council, must take all necessary actions before a greater disaster unfolds. I wish to share 4 points. First, we must firmly oppose any attempt to occupy Gaza. The recent approval by Israel's Security Cabinet of a plan to take over Gaza is a matter of grave concern for China. We urge Israel to stop this dangerous move at once. Gaza belongs to the Palestinian people. It is an integral part of the Palestinian territory. Any action that seeks to alter its demographic and territorial structure must be met with utmost rejection and resistance. Second, the illusion of military supremacy must be abandoned. Military means are not the way to solve this problem. An immediate ceasefire is the only right way to save lives and secure the release of hostages. Continually escalated military offensives in Gaza will only lead to more killings and deaths. We've also noted that an immediate ceasefire and the return of hostages are the very wishes of the Israeli people and the families of the hostages. The Israeli government needs to listen to the calls of both the international community and its people, immediately stop escalating tensions, and put an end to its military operations in Gaza. The country with significant influence over the parties must uphold a just and responsible stance and take concrete steps to push for a ceasefire. Third, it is imperative to alleviate the humanitarian disaster in Gaza. Gaza is on the verge of famine, with nearly 200 people having already died of starvation. Israel issued forced evacuation orders one after another, affecting over 87% of the Gazan territory and repeatedly displacing more than 1.9 million people. The lives of 2 million Gazans must not be the sacrifice of the war. The weaponization of humanitarian supplies is unacceptable. The collective punishment of the Gazan people is unacceptable. Attacking civilians and humanitarian workers as they search for supplies is equally unacceptable. Israel must fulfill its obligations under international humanitarian law as an occupying power, opening all border crossings, lifting restrictions on aid access, ensuring the large-scale, swift and safe entry of humanitarian supplies into Gaza, and supporting the UN in its aid delivery in accordance with the humanitarian principles. Fourth, it is crucial to reinvigorate the prospect of the two-state solution. Implementing the two-state solution is the only viable path to resolving the Palestinian question and achieving peaceful coexistence between Palestine and Israel. Last week's high-level conference on implementing the two-state solution witnessed strong, resounding calls in support of the two-state solution. This positive momentum should be maintained at the international level to redouble efforts to advance the political process of the two-state solution and jointly counter any unilateral move that sabotages its foundation. China stands ready to work alongside the international community to advance an end to the war in Gaza, alleviate the humanitarian catastrophe, and implement the two-state solution, ultimately achieving a comprehensive, just and lasting solution of the Palestinian question. I thank you, President.
I thank the delegation of China for their statement. I give the floor to the delegation of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we are disappointed that the Panamanian presidency ignored the request of the majority of members of the Security Council, including the Russian Federation, to convene an emergency meeting immediately, and took the decision to only hold it today, despite the extremely dangerous developments on the occupied Palestinian territory, following the Israeli leadership's announcement of a decision to escalate hostilities in the Gaza Strip, envisaging its occupation. We thank Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Yencha and the head of the OCHA office in Geneva, Ramesh Rajasingham, for their briefings. The other day, the world found out the shocking news that the Security Cabinet of the government of Benjamin Netanyahu had taken the decision to introduce forces into Gaza and to bring the Gaza Strip under the total control of the Israeli security forces, with the aim, as the Israeli cabinet said, of defeating Hamas. These actions by the Israeli leadership are a gross violation of international law. They demonstrate their blatant disregard for the appeals of the international community and the decisions of the UN Security Council, and they deal a very serious blow to the prospects for the two-state solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. We roundly condemn the intentions of the Netanyahu government to seize Gaza. In this context, we join the calls upon West Jerusalem to refrain from such extremely dangerous steps which undermine the already fragile prospects for the peaceful settlement to the Middle East conflict. We insist on Israel's strict compliance with the norms of international law and the well-known legal basis for the Middle East peace process, including the relevant resolutions of the UN General Assembly and Security Council. We also recall that Israel's plans run counter to the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of the 19th of July 2024, which inter alia unambiguously requires that West Jerusalem immediately put an end to the occupation of Palestinians. Moreover, The adoption of this plan essentially indicates the official and public recognition by Israel of its aims to seize and occupy the enclave. As is known, after separating from Gaza and the withdrawal of Israeli settlers from there in 2005, the Israeli leadership said that there was no state of occupation, which was not in line with the international legal interpretation given the continued Israeli control over the perimeter of the Gaza Strip, its airspace and its coastline. It turns out that over all of these years, Israel had been carrying out and is now intensifying precisely such an occupation of Gaza with all of the resulting obligations to protect and provide for the civilian population, which are binding and which should not depend on the wishes of the occupying party, as stipulated by the norms and principles of international humanitarian law, including the Fourth Geneva Convention. Mr. President, literally a few days ago, here in this Council, upon the initiative of Israel, we had a detailed discussion of the situation of the Israeli hostages in Gaza. The majority of the members of the Security Council clearly and unambiguously stated that one of the main preconditions for the release of all detained persons is an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. It is thanks to pauses in the bloodshed and active diplomacy, rather than the reckless intensification of hostilities, that over the course of 18 months it was possible to get more than 140 people out of the enclave. Unfortunately, West Jerusalem once again has not heeded the appeals of the global majority, nor sensible voices within Israel, nor the relatives and families of the hostages themselves. Instead of a negotiating process, the Israeli authorities have decided to opt for a further escalation of violence, thus jeopardizing the security and lives of the Israeli hostages, who, as we have seen, are in already unbearable conditions that are made worse by the acute shortages of food and water in Gaza. It turns out that the Foreign Minister of Israel, who was here on the 5th of August, hypocritically shed crocodile tears in this chamber over the fate of the Israeli hostages, and he already knew that the Israeli cabinet would soon take this decision, essentially ruling out the possibility of them returning home alive. By all accounts, Mr. Saar needed to lay the groundwork for it and to put out the image in the media of the solidarity and sympathy of Security Council members so as to then be able to continue killing Palestinians. Such an attempt to manipulate the Security Council for domestic Israeli interests beggars belief, just like how the Jewish people that faced the Holocaust in the Second World War can today put Palestinians in a ghetto and pursue their total destruction. How quickly the lessons of history are forgotten. It is also clear that the implementation of the Israeli leadership's plans to fully clear the enclave would even further complicate the humanitarian situation in Gaza, because essentially they have already announced further mass forced displacements and thus the suffering of the civilian population, further casualties and more bloodshed. Given the way that the conflict in Gaza is unfolding, we have no reason to believe the public statements of the Israeli authorities that they intend to provide the civilian population outside of various hostilities with everything they need. The methods that Israel is using to distribute food are well known. They are inhumane, they contradict the norms of IHL, and they are only leading to civilian deaths. This was, in particular, clearly demonstrated by the activities of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, where more than 1,500 Palestinians have already died in areas where rations are being distributed. We shouldn't forget that the planned displacement of civilians during active hostilities and also the use of hunger as a weapon can be qualified as war crimes and crimes against humanity. Moreover, such actions could fall under Article 2C of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide of 1948, which Israel ratified in 1950. Mr. President, in conclusion, I would like to note that the day before yesterday, in an interview with an American television channel, Benjamin Netanyahu spoke about his intention to create an alternative administration in Gaza, which would give Gazans, I quote, a different future. This administration, according to Netanyahu, wouldn't be Palestinian. That, in turn, also contradicts numerous widely accepted international legal understandings about the Gaza Strip as an integral part of a future Palestinian state. For our part, we suggest considering some rhetorical questions. What sort of future can people have under occupation? And what do they have to say to the families of the more than 60,000 dead who no longer have any future? How many more Palestinians need to die before this inhumane slaughter ends? And how much longer can they turn a blind eye to this outrage, those who consistently and comprehensively support Israel and prevent the Security Council from acting? For our part, we consistently and unchangingly have advocated for a diplomatic solution to the Palestinian question on the basis of the two-state for two peoples formula. If implemented, Israel's legitimate security concerns would be satisfied, just as the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people to their own state would also be satisfied. The alternative to this is the death of tens of thousands more entirely innocent people, including the Israeli hostages that have been held for almost 2 years. The UN Security Council quite simply must prevent this outcome. I hope that, at long last, Washington will realize this soon. For the time being, as we understand it, despite the assurances of the State Department that they are continuing real and serious diplomatic efforts to end suffering in Gaza, to release the hostages and to achieve a permanent peace, end quote, the United States quite simply is washing its hand and is giving West Jerusalem carte blanche to have full freedom of action in Gaza. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the delegation of the Russian Federation for their statement. I will now make a statement in my capacity as representative of Panama. Excellencies, colleagues, Panama thanks the Assistant Secretary General for Europe, Central Asia and the Americas, Mr. Miroslav Jenča, and the head and representative of OCHA in Geneva, Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham, for their valuable presentations, as well as the delegations that requested this emergency meeting in the light of recent events that could further aggravate the devastating situation in the Gaza Strip. We also welcome the presence of the delegations of Israel, Iraq, Kuwait, Senegal, and the observer state of Palestine. Panama has maintained, and we reiterate today, that it is always better to choose the path of moderation, where dialogue arises and where it can develop, and the path of human dignity as the foundation of coexistence upon which peace must be built. In this context, we view with deep concern, very deep concern, the surprising recent announcements regarding a possible operation to take control of Gaza City, a densely populated center already severely affected by the war, and what's even more troubling, the possible extension of such control to the rest of the Strip. Such action under current conditions would entail incalculable humanitarian risks for hundreds of thousands of Gazan civilians and for the hostages that are still held in captivity, in addition to further deepening the divide and moving the parties further away from the negotiating table. In our view, it's clearly understood that any major use of force must be assessed in the light of its immediate humanitarian consequences, its impact on the prospects for a political solution, and in accordance with obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law. After more than 675 days of conflict, which have left more than 62,000 civilians dead, more than 125,000 wounded, entire populations that have been displaced by force from one end to the other of the Strip, time and again. The scale of destruction in Gaza is catastrophic. Hospitals and schools collapsed. Neighborhoods reduced to rubble. millions suffering from hunger and thirst, leaving entire generations scarred by violence. This tragic reality shows that the exclusive option of force has not offered a way out of the current war, nor has it resolved the underlying causes that have fueled this conflict for nearly 8 decades. On the contrary, the option of force has reinforced the logic of extremes, feeding a cycle of violence that is blocking any path towards a viable political solution. With the attacks of the 7th of October, Hamas have provoked this war, killing and abducting innocent civilians, betting on extremism as its sole and cruel strategy. That is the terrain on which it seeks to sustain itself, because it knows that in war it can prolong its existence and prevent progress towards peace. Precisely for this reason, the narrative of extremes must not be allowed to prevail on the ground. Acting with restraint, the restraint demanded by this current moment, does not amount to weakness in the face of Hamas's cruel extremism. What it would do is project a political will that breaks with the warlike logic that has dominated this crisis, and it would open up a space to protect lives and move towards a sustainable solution. Despite the prolonged stalemate in negotiations, we believe that there is no other path than that of moderation and dialogue, which have already shown concrete, albeit unfortunately temporary, results in favour to the benefit of civilians. We encourage those actors who maintain established communication channels with the parties to redouble their mediation efforts to achieve a sustainable ceasefire, facilitate the immediate, dignified and unconditional release of the hostages, and ensure adequate, safe and continuous access for vital humanitarian assistance. The experience of the days when the truce was in effect, though fragile, showed that it is possible to stop human suffering, to allow unrestricted delivery of vital assistance without restrictions, and to advance in the release of all hostages still held by Hamas, whose actions we once again condemn. Excellencies, the civilian population in Gaza does not need more fire. What it needs is water, medicines, food, and protection. It needs to be freed from fear, violence, death, blood, the tunnels of fear, from torture and from hunger. To this end, different decisions and actions are required, ones that envision political solutions to a stalemate that has prolonged suffering for far too long. Such actions must rely on existing humanitarian mechanisms and on the proven capacity of UN agencies to provide assistance effectively and neutrally. Panama deeply values and supports the work that continues to be done under extremely difficult conditions, United Nations agencies and other humanitarian actors on the ground. We urge that their protection be fully guaranteed, as well as the conditions necessary for them to operate safely, sustainably, and without restrictions. Panama renews its commitment to a political solution that ensures human dignity, peace, and security for both Israelis and Palestinians. Thank you very much.
Vuelvo a asumir las funciones de la presidencia del...
I now resume my functions as President of the Security Council. I give the floor to the delegation of the Permanent Observer, State of Palestine.
Thank you, Mr. President, for convening this meeting based on a request supported by nearly every member of the Security Council to address the grave situation in Gaza and further shocking developments. Allow me also to thank ASG Yancha for his report and also Mr. Raja Singham for his briefing. Mr. President, Israel is killing Palestine in Gaza. That is its objective. And there, over 2 million victims are enduring unbearable agony that the human mind can barely comprehend. We are not allowed to fail them any longer. We do not have the luxury to feel guilt or shame. We owe them to act now to stop this genocide. Mr. President, there is something undeniable. Israel does not care about what we say, what you say. It is obvious. The only thing that matters now is what we do. What will force Israel to change course is our ability to transform justified condemnation into just actions. And history will judge us all. We appreciate the description of almost all of you of the deepness of the pain and the tragedy that our people is enduring. While this is okay, it is not sufficient. You have to act. You have to do something about it. You have to stop it. Otherwise, this analysis and description does not mean anything if you do not do something to stop it. And you have tools available to you to do so. Mr. President, there is an international plan adopted by the International High-Level Conference in Palestine, co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France, that starts with ending the use of starvation as a weapon of war and ending the war on Gaza through a ceasefire, the release of the hostages and prisoners, a massive surge of humanitarian aid to the Palestinian people in coordination and leadership, in coordination with and leadership of the United Nations, and in line with humanitarian principles and the full withdrawal of Israel from Gaza. The plan further foresees the Palestinian National Authority resuming its sole governmental and security duties in the Gaza Strip with regional and international support, and Hamas handing over its weapons to the Palestinian National Authority in the context of an end to the war and in line with the objective of an independent Palestinian state. It sets forth an irreversible pathway to an independent and sovereign Palestinian state leading to shared peace and security and regional integration. Many of you referred to the results of that historic international conference about 2 weeks ago here in the General Assembly. If Israel's concerns was actually the end of Hamas rule or Hamas disarming, if its concern was actually security, it would have rallied this plan and should have been happy to see this plan adopted by almost the entire international community. Israel is seeking to cement its full military control over the Gaza Strip and is prolonging this war not to end Hamas rule or to disarm it, but to prevent independent Palestinian statehood. That is the truth. The Israeli government has said that clearly over and over again. Somebody was referring to the statement of Prime Minister Netanyahu. He doesn't want to see a Palestinian governing body overlooking the affairs over Gaza, but somebody else, not Palestinians. He said it. It's not a secret. It's not an accusation. It's a fact. Israel proved long ago it was not concerned by the fate of the hostages. Look at the tens of thousands demonstrating in Tel Aviv and other cities, demanding immediate ceasefire and seriously concerned if this insanity to take place against our people in the Gaza Strip, then this is the execution or the death of the hostages, because that is the position of the families and the tens of thousands who are demonstrating in Tel Aviv. This latest decision is some more blatant demonstration of that. The Israeli government dehumanized and demonized Palestinians to such an extent that its genocide against them through mass killing and starvation, including of children, is not opposed in Israel by some, is only opposed in Israel by some brave voices. Israel proved long ago that its goal is the destruction of the Palestinian people through forced transfer and massacres to facilitate its annexation of our land. If some people believe what Prime Minister Netanyahu said yesterday and today, that there is a huge global lie, that there is no starvation in Gaza, and the two gentlemen from the leadership of the UN is also participating in spreading lies, then why don't you, the Security Council, go to the Security Council, take with you 100 journalists from your countries and other countries to verify exactly what is happening in Gaza. If he's so sure of this global conspiracy about the lie, let him prove it, invite you, allow you to go to the Gaza Strip and see exactly what is happening there. Take journalists with you so that you can verify exactly what is happening in Gaza. Because I think Mr. Netanyahu, in spite of all of the effort that he is putting with his government, he doesn't have credibility. He did not convince almost all of you and tens of countries outside this chamber from his narrative, and the narrative of his government, and the narrative of his foreign minister who came trying to manipulate a humanitarian story of a captive and the pain of that caused to that family, and he failed in trying to convince you to forget about the pain of the Palestinian people. Such illegal and immoral plans cannot be met with only outrage. That would not be sufficient. They require the mobilization of all the tools available to stop them, and we really appreciate the massive reaction from almost all countries in all corners of the globe, whether Arab and Muslim countries, or European countries, or countries that are sitting around this table, in condemning, as 5 of them stood outside this chamber in a brave way and principled way, not to please anyone, not to reward anyone, but to act on the basis of principles and conviction in condemning this plan by the Israeli government and demanding that they stop this plan, not to allow it to be implemented and to reconsider. Israel proved long ago it does not care about the Charter, international law, or the resolutions of this Council if not accompanied by consequences. These facts have led many to rightly wonder, how on earth is Israel still allowed to sit around this table and in these United Nations? If it was another country, you would have been imposing sanctions a long time ago. Mr. President, countries around the world are adopting more and more measures to end any form of complicity and to advance accountability, and we appreciate these efforts. A country like Germany to decide not to send weapons to Israel to kill our people in Gaza, just only to use one example. All states should undertake such steps immediately. Of course, it would be wonderful if you implement your resolutions, and would be excessively wonderful if you adopt additional resolutions with measures. But if these are not possible, act in your national capacity. You have tools available to you, in addition to the tools available to the Security Council, but you have tools available to you in your national capacity. Many of you are using them. I urge others to use them and to ask others to do many other things, including the recognition of the State of Palestine. All states should undertake such steps immediately. But in the face of such contempt and of 2 million lives being destroyed, of people, children, killed, maimed, displaced, starved, humiliated, mutilated, buried alive, burnt alive, abducted, tortured, orphaned, bereaved, shattered, torn apart, the measures taken do not match the level of the crimes committed so as to truly deter them. Mr. President, 2 million people continue to endure pain and agony that no human or nation should ever be forced to. They matter. Every single one of them matters, and no one matters more than them. The position of Palestine is unequivocal. We reject all harm to civilians, and our civilians are not less civilians. Their lives are not less worthy. We have never justified and always rejected harming Israeli civilians, killing them or taking them hostage. But we reject any attempt to justify the massacres committed by Israel against Palestinian civilians, or its abduction of thousands of Palestinians, or its starvation policy, or its displacement policy, or its annexation policy. There is no justification whatsoever for such brutality, such impunity. We have called for a ceasefire over and over again, and we were clear that Hamas must work with the mediators to remove any obstacle, to excuse that would prolong this war. We appreciate the efforts by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States in this regard. We presented plans and proposals and cooperated with every effort to facilitate an agreement to end the war on our people, while reiterating clearly that the absence of such an agreement in no way allows Israel to pursue its war of atrocities against the Palestinian people, including these plans of trying to expel 1 million people from Gaza City, and to have a number of divisions of the Israeli army to control all corners of the Gaza Strip. Neither a ceasefire agreement was reached, nor the massacres stopped. The devastation of our people, the annihilation of life in Gaza continues as we speak. Therefore, given Netanyahu's insistence to pursue this genocide, to destroy our people through death and displacement, to annex our land, to destroy Palestine, and with it, any chance for peace, this Council must act under Chapter 7 to deprive Israel of the means to pursue this war of atrocities. And I appreciate that a number of you refer to that explicitly, and others refer to it by implication. To hold it accountable for its crimes and to send an immediate international protection force to save the Palestinian people from certain death. There is no doubt that it is Israel's impunity that led to Israelis' insanity. And as the world said clearly, that nothing that Israel did before the 7th of October could justify harming Israeli civilians on the 7th of October. Nothing that Hamas did on the 7th of October can justify harming Palestinian civilians since. As long as Israel is above the law, it will act as an outlaw state. Mr. President, as they have for over 20 years since the Arab Peace Initiative, the region and Palestine are making the choice of peace. I said it loudly and clearly last few days ago in my statement that Ambassador Samuel referred to. In spite of the pain, in spite of the hardship, in spite of the insanity, in spite of people are not maybe thinking logically, we're not losing our minds or allowing our heart to dictate our decisions. We extend our hand in the direction of peace. We accept the declaration that was adopted by the majority of nations during that historic conference on the two-state solution. And we urge those who have not joined to send their letters to the two co-chairs, Saudi Arabia and France, declaring their commitment and abiding by the declaration of the 19 leaders of this conference, the two co-chairs and the 17 co-chairs of the round tables. Peace is much better for everyone than war. We don't need no more wars. We need to stop the killing, the occupation, devastation, hostages, prisoners. We need to respond to the call of millions of people in all corners of the globe, in all capitals, who are saying, peace now, ceasefire now, release of hostages and prisoners now, stop the starvation, send food and medicine and water up to scale to the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, allow for the reconstruction of Gaza, allow for the implementation of the two-state solution by beginning with ending this illegal occupation, the independence of the State of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital, and therefore to have the two-state solution as a reality on the ground. This option is much better than the option of what Netanyahu and his government are planning to do against our people in the Gaza Strip, as if what's happening to them is not enough. They want to add more devastation, more agony, more pain. They want to erase them from the face of earth. and we will not allow them to do that, and you should not allow them to do that. We are willing to work with the U.S. administration, Saudi Arabia, and France, and the members of this Council and other regional and international partners to bring this war on our people to an end now. To end the bloodshed and the suffering now and once and for all. To achieve freedom and shared peace, security and prosperity. We have a duty to act and cannot waver. Your actions today will determine the fate of millions of people tomorrow, at least those who would have survived by then, and the fate of our region for generations to come. And I thank you very much, Mr. President.
Agradezco.
I thank the delegation of the Observer State of Palestine for their statement. I now give the floor to the delegation of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President, and to our briefers here today. Despite some extraordinary and brazen language and statements we heard here, I will, however, attempt to address the supposed reason for the convening of this meeting. On Thursday night, Israel's Security Cabinet approved the Prime Minister's proposal to defeat the Iran-backed Hamas terrorist organization. This is the same organization responsible for the October 7th attack, currently holding 50 hostages under unimaginable conditions, and remaining the sole source of suffering for the population in Gaza. The IDF is preparing to take control of Gaza City while ensuring humanitarian assistance flows to civilians outside combat zones and away from the reach of Hamas. This is not conquest. Israel has no plans or desire to permanently occupy Gaza. This is liberation from a brutal terror regime. As our briefer stated earlier, I wish to reiterate the principles, the 5 clear principles that the Israeli Security Cabinet adopted for concluding the war. 1, the disarming of Hamas. 2, the return of all our hostages, both living and deceased. 3, the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. 4, Israeli security control in the Gaza Strip. 5, the establishment of a non-Israeli peaceful civil administration governed neither by Hamas nor the Palestinian Authority. This is the only way to ensure a better future for Israelis and Palestinians alike. Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it clear. Israel's goal is not to take over Gaza, but to free Gaza from Hamas and enable a peaceful government to rise in its place. This is the path to stability. This is the path to peace. Hamas's repeated refusal to agree to ceasefire arrangements, together with the horrific images of Eviatar David and Rom Braslavsky, exposing yet another aspect of the organization's monstrosity, make it clear that Hamas will not relinquish its control over Gaza through peaceful means. Nonetheless, despite a broad international consensus that Hamas cannot remain in power, and despite clear evidence of its refusal to give up control, parts of the international community continue to oppose Israel's efforts to act against Hamas. This position is both contradictory and difficult to reconcile with the stated goal of ending Hamas's rule. Some who criticize Israel make sure to call for the unconditional release of the hostages merely to clear their conscience. But how can one ignore the fact that Hamas is exploiting the hostages and the Gazan population to maintain its position, benefiting from attempts to pressure Israel and from the willingness of some countries to recognize a Palestinian state? As Secretary of State Rubio said, talks with Hamas fell apart on the day President Macron made the unilateral decision that he's going to recognize the Palestinian state. Those messages, largely symbolic in their minds, actually have made it harder to get peace and harder to achieve a deal with Hamas. As was mentioned before, Hamas itself has even admitted this. The pressure should not be placed on Israel, who suffered the most horrific attack against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, but on Hamas, in order to demand the immediate and unconditional release of our hostages. Yet, in a complete inversion of morality and logic, this body has urgently convened to chastise the one democracy in the Middle East, the nation standing on the front line of the battle against radical extremist terrorism. If this body truly believes in justice and morality, then let your urgency be directed where it belongs, towards dismantling Hamas, towards freeing our hostages, toward ensuring that such atrocities never happen again. Anything less is not urgency, it is hypocrisy. I thank you, Mr. President.
Agradezco.
I thank the delegation of Israel for their statement. I give the floor to the delegation of Iraq.
سيد الرئيس، أود أن ألقي هذا البيان نيابة عن المجموعة العربية.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a statement on behalf of the Arab group.
لإعراب عن تهنئة.
At the outset, allow me to congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Security Council this month. We thank you for this opportunity to deliver this statement. We would also like to thank Mr. Yensha and Mr. Rajasingham for their thorough briefings. The Middle East region is at a critical juncture in the context of the terrible and brutal war waged by Israel against the Gaza Strip and the humanitarian tragedy that has resulted from that and which is worsening the situation for the population of the Gaza Strip, more than 2 million of them, the majority of them women and children. The world is seeing the shocking, striking scenes that are shocking the human conscience, images of civilians that are exhausted by hunger and the blockade, images of those that are being killed as they await a meal to feed their children. Given the serious results of Israeli policy, in the context of those results, the world learned of the dangerous decision taken by the Israeli government to invade the Gaza Strip and to impose full control on it. The Arab group, in the strongest possible terms, condemns the plan adopted by the Israeli cabinet, aiming to consolidate its occupation of the Gaza Strip and to expand its total military control in the Gaza Strip. This is a continuation of flagrant Israeli violations of international law, international humanitarian law, and this clearly undermines the peaceful solution as well as the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to establish an independent state with Jerusalem as capital. The Arab group considers the announcement calling for the imposition of so-called Israeli authority on an occupied Jerusalem as a flagrant violation of international law and also a flagrant violation of the relevant resolutions of the Security Council, which affirms that all measures and decisions aiming to legitimize the occupation are null and void, including settlement building activities in the occupied Palestinian territory since 1967. Israel has no sovereignty over the occupied Palestinian territory. This unilateral Israeli action does not bring with it any legal consequences and cannot, in any case, modify the legal status of the occupied Palestinian territory, first and foremost Jerusalem, which remains an integral part of that territory. These measures only exacerbate tensions which are rising in the region, and which, because of Israeli aggression in Gaza and the resulting humanitarian strip in Gaza, are making the situation worse. Mr. President, the Arab group condemns civilians in Gaza being exposed to death, hunger, humiliation. We condemn the repeated use by Israel of starvation as a weapon of war and food as a lever to exert pressure. We condemn in the strongest possible terms the policies of blockade and the forced displacement of innocent civilians, as well as the repeated targeting of civilian facilities, including hospitals, displaced persons camps, and vital infrastructure. That constitutes a flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. We call upon the international community to act immediately to end the aggression and to recognize the catastrophe and the famine in Gaza, and also to break the blockade imposed upon the Gaza Strip. It is also necessary to guarantee the delivery of humanitarian assistance and relief, as well as medical assistance, and the access of international organizations must be guaranteed in Gaza, and their teams must be protected so that they can fully play their role. We also call for support for UNRWA and for accountability, international accountability mechanisms vis-à-vis these Israeli crimes to be activated. The Arab group welcomes the engagement by the State of Qatar and the Arab Republic of Egypt to continue their efforts with the United States of America when it comes to mediation in Gaza to reach a comprehensive and immediate agreement on a ceasefire which would end the war and put an end to the humanitarian suffering in the Gaza Strip, while also guaranteeing the protection of civilians, the exchange of detainees and prisoners, paving the way for an end to the crisis and a relaunch of recovery and reconstruction efforts. The Arab group had asked your August Council, and reiterates this appeal today, under the mandate of the Council in accordance with the Charter, the Council being the organ responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security. We had called upon the Council to adopt a resolution under Chapter 7, which would guarantee that Israel, the occupying power, respected the relevant resolutions of the Council for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, and to ensure that that effective measures were taken to force Israel to end its illegal occupation of the Palestinian territory and to implement the provisions of the advisory opinion of the ICJ dating the 19th of July 2024. Mr. President, the Arab group categorically rejects attempts to undermine the Ibrahimi Mosque and all holy sites and holy places, both Muslim and Christian, in the occupied Palestinian territory, including the targeting by the occupying forces recently of the Latin Church in Gaza. The Arab group reiterates the need to respect the legal and historic status quo of the Islamic and Christian holy sites in the city of Jerusalem. There is no sovereignty for Israel, the occupying power, over the Palestinian territory and the sites of Palestinian heritage. In that regard as well, the Arab group firmly condemns the incursion by several dozen Israeli settlers, led by the Minister of National Security of the occupation government, of the terrace of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. We also condemn the Israeli occupation plan to transfer the administration authority of the Ibrahimi Mosque and its control from the Ministry of Religious Affairs, the Palestinian Ministry of Religious Affairs, to the Jewish Religious Council in Kiryat Arba. These measures are flagrant violations of international law and international legitimacy. They are a provocation of the sentiments of Muslims around the world. The Arab group warns that the continuation of those violations would expand the circle of violence in the region. The Arab group calls upon the international community to shoulder its moral and legal responsibility to protect Palestinian holy places and to force the Israeli occupying authorities to end their criminal plans aiming at erasing the identity of the Palestinian people. The Arab group reaffirms that the use of force only leads to further destruction and misery. It will not lead to peace. There is no alternative to justice for the Palestinian people and a comprehensive, global, lasting solution to the Palestinian question under international law and resolutions of international law. We also reiterate our commitment to a just and comprehensive peace as a strategic choice to end the occupation and to resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict under international law and the resolutions of international legitimacy, including resolutions 242, 338, 497, 1515, and 2234, but also the Principle of Land for Peace and the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002. The colonial occupation of the Palestinian and Arab occupied lands must be ended, including the occupied Syrian Golan and the occupied Lebanese territories. The independence of a Palestinian state must be enshrined that is fully sovereign with Jerusalem as its capital. The inalienable rights of the Palestinian people must be restored, including the right to self-determination, the right to return, and compensation for Palestinian refugees, the issue of which must be resolved under General Assembly Resolution number 194. In that regard, the International Conference for the Settlement of the Palestinian Question, held last month, co-chaired by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and France, reflects a collective will on the part of the international community to effectively and seriously contribute to the peaceful settlement of the Palestinian question in the form of concrete commitments for a comprehensive, just and lasting settlement of this issue, which establishes peace, security and stability in the region. The Arab Group welcomes the communique of the 21st of July 2025 by a number of countries regarding the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories, which clearly called for an end to the aggression in Gaza, the immediate ending of the policy of genocide, and the systematic starvation, and accountability for perpetrators of crimes against the Palestinian people, as well as sanctions being imposed on the occupying power and its terrorist settlers. We also welcome the announcement by a number of countries of their intention to recognize the brotherly Palestinian state. These are positive measures in line with international law and the relevant resolutions of the Security Council. This constitutes significant support for the legitimate rights of the fraternal Palestinian people to ensure that they can enjoy their right to self-determination and establish their independent state, and also to strengthen the possibilities for a comprehensive and lasting peace in the region. The Arab Group reiterates its call upon all those states that have not yet recognized the state of Palestine to take similar measures that reflect a commitment to international law and to support the historic unchanged rights of the fraternal Palestinian people on their territory. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the delegation of Iraq for their statement.
Doy la palabra a la...
I now give the floor to the delegation of Kuwait.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Gracias, señor presidente. Y permíteme en primer lugar...
Thank you, Mr. President, and allow me to begin by thank you for convening this meeting and congratulate you and your country on assuming the presidency of the Security Council.
سيد الرئيس أتشرف بإلقاء هذا البيان نيابة عن
Mr. President, I'm honored to deliver this statement on behalf of the member states of the Gulf Cooperation Council. The United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Bahrain, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the State of Qatar, the Sultanate of Oman, and my own country, the State of Kuwait. We would like to thank Mr. Miroslav Jenča, Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs, and Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham, Head and Representative of the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in Geneva, OCHA, for the valuable briefings. Mr. President, we reaffirm our firm, unchanged principled position in support of the Palestinian cause and our rejection of all forms of occupation and settlement. We express our deep concern and our strong denunciation of the dangerous decision announced by the Israeli government to invade the Gaza Strip and impose full control over it, which is a direct threat to the lives of more than 2 million Palestinians, most of them women and children. And this lays the groundwork for a new stage of genocide and forced displacement, and undermines any chance of achieving a two-state solution. It's also a flagrant violation of international law and the United Nations Charter. Any comprehensive invasion of the Gaza Strip will not just impact the Palestinian people, but will also affect the entire region, leading to an unprecedented spiral of violence and explosion, and Israel will bear full responsibility for it, and the international community will have to answer for silence or failure to prevent it. Mr. President, the international community, headed by the Security Council, must assume its legal, moral, and historic responsibilities. The scenes of genocide are being repeated before the eyes of the Council without any action being taken. This is a failure of the international community, which threatens to undermine the role and credibility of the Council, particularly in this matter. It is a destructive message to the population when international laws are applied selectively. Mr. President, urgent and binding measures must be taken under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter in order to stop this brutal aggression, guarantee international protection for the Palestinian people, and ensure the safe delivery of humanitarian, medical and relief assistance. And we must also support UNRWA and reject any attempts to undermine its role. In this regard, we value the great efforts undertaken by the State of Qatar and the Arab Republic of Egypt in coordination with the United States of America to achieve a comprehensive and immediate ceasefire to halt the aggression, protect civilians, an agreement that would also ensure the exchange of prisoners and detainees, and which would create the ideal conditions for the return of displaced persons to their homes and facilitate the safe and unimpeded entry of humanitarian aid. The Gulf Cooperation Council states support these efforts, and we want to strengthen them through coordination with the relevant regional and international parties in a way that breaks the cycle of violence and revives a serious political process that meets the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people. Mr. President, we all witnessed just a short time ago the convening of the high-level international conference for the peaceful settlement of the Palestinian question and the implementation of the two-state solution, co-chaired by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the French Republic. The conference embodied the will of the international community to relaunch a serious political process towards the establishment of an independent Palestinian state on the borders of the 4th of June 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital. In this regard, We welcome the recognition by a number of friendly states of the State of Palestine. However, Israel, the occupying power, continues its unilateral policies in violation of international law, defying the will of the international community and working against the commitments and efforts that were made during that conference. We condemn the continued Israeli violations in Jerusalem and the West Bank, including colonial settler expansion and the expulsion and displacement of residents and repeated incursions of holy Islamic and Christian places in order to change the historic legal situation. Any attempt to impose a new colonial reality in Gaza or in the West Bank fully undermines the basis for a two-state solution and turns this international commitment into a political mirage. We warn against the continuation of these policies, which will only further worsen the cycle of violence. Mr. President, the GCC reaffirms that the only path to achieving security and peace in the region is to end the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian and Arab territories and to move towards the independence of a fully sovereign state of Palestine, but also to guarantee, in doing that, guaranteeing the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, the right to self-determination, return, and to live in dignity on their land, in accordance with relevant Security Council resolutions, in particular resolutions 242, 338, 497, 1515, and 2334. And we must also implement the advisory opinion issued by the International Court of Justice of the 19th of July 2024. In conclusion, and from this podium, our message is clear. Israel's impunity is no longer acceptable. And the ongoing aggression against Gaza is a real test of the credibility of the international system and its ability to protect people's peace and international peace and security. I thank you. I thank the delegation of Kuwait for their statement. I now give the floor to the delegation of Senegal. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I take this opportunity to congratulate you and to thank you for allowing my delegation that chairs the Committee on the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People to speak before this Council on a matter that no one can any longer ignore, the human tragedy unfolding before our eyes in Gaza. I also commend the insightful statements of Mr. Miroslav Jenka and Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, we are indignant at this tragedy. More than 60,000 lives shattered, massive destruction, a population starved, dispossessed, trapped under military attacks that are nothing less than collective punishment, cruel and illegal. Against the Israeli army stand unarmed civilians. We must oppose Israel's destructive force with a credible and unwavering force of law. Following the international conference on the two-state solution, Israel's announcement of the total takeover of Gaza is a blatant violation of international law and a direct challenge to the international community. If the world remains a spectator, we will not only witness an illegal occupation, we will see the erasure of human dignity, the perpetration of a crime of apartheid, and the unfolding of a genocide. Senegal strongly condemns the attacks on holy sites, Muslim and Christian, including the Church of the Holy Family, and the provocative intrusions into the courtyard of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The international community must protect Al-Aqsa and preserve the sacred nature of Jerusalem. We call upon the Security Council to awaken our collective humanity in order to end the disaster in Gaza. This requires 1. A military embargo and restrictions on arms shipments to the occupying power. 2. The immediate implementation of Resolution 2735 of 2024. In other words, a lasting ceasefire, release of hostages, and unhindered humanitarian access. And 3. The recognition of the State of Palestine as a full member of the UN and the deployment of an interposition force. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, if this complete takeover takes place, impunity will become the rule, and we will have given our backing to one of the worst ethnic cleansings in history. States must act now. They must apply the ICJ's advisory opinions and execute ICC mandates so that perpetrators, accomplices and sponsors are held accountable for their crimes. Finally, I wish to reiterate my country's call to all states that are committed to justice and humanity by legal obligation as well as by moral duty to embrace the aspirations of the Palestinian people for peace, stability and sovereignty within the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as the capital of the State of Palestine. Humanity is watching us. History will judge us. Thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the delegation of Senegal for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.